archaeologists discover bones from 1,000 years ago, laid to rest in ways to suggest that the skeleton belonged to a person who did not conform to typical understandings of gender and sex. The internet screams transgender. While there are many accounts of gender non-conforming people existing throughout history, dating back countless centuries, it becomes quite egocentric of people living in the 21st century to retroactively label them transgender. People from back then would have no idea what that's supposed to mean, let alone identify with the term's nuances or cultural significance. After all, transgender was only coined in the 1960s. It is, in comparison, a fairly new term, trying to describe a long-standing concept about gender and sexuality. Ancient civilizations had their own names, their own understanding and cultural meaning of what their gender non-conforming people were. Historical records point to such people as sacred for possessing aspects of both sexes, a unity of genders, enlightened beings. That is quite the contrast from how transgender is perceived in current times, a minority group. In Louvre Museum, Paris, there is a statue on display titled Sleeping Hermaphroditus or Hermaphrodite. This one right here. You might have seen other statues of this ancient Greek deity in different museums or places, often portrayed as a goddess with her D proudly hanging out. In her mythos, Hermaphroditus was born the son of Hermes, messenger of gods, and Aphrodite, goddess of lust, pleasure, beauty. Hermaphroditus was such an attractive, pretty boy that a water nymph named Solmasis fell deeply in love with him before the merge. Solmasis was so infatuated by the young boy that she completely fused herself into him, literally transforming the two into one being. The Venus with a penis, as we've come to know as a deity Hermaphroditus. Worshipped by many for personifying harmony of sex and gender characteristics, a bridge between worlds, beauty and strength, sensuality and wisdom, nurturing and autonomous. Centuries later, inspired by what she represented, scientists would coin the term hermaphrodite to describe organisms that had both sexual reproductive organs, observed in worms, snails, slugs, flukes, and moss creatures. As a side note, there are no accounts of mammals, such as humans, ever being hermaphrodites. Ironically, Hermaphroditus, the deity herself, would not be considered a hermaphrodite either, as she has always been portrayed with a body identical to what we might call a trans woman's body today. Blatantly put, she did not have two sets of different genitalia, which brings us to a more recent interpretation of the two-in-one sexual archetype. Hentai, or explicit erotic drawings, cartoon porn, has a very popular category called hutanari, or huta for short, which roughly translates to of two forms. 30 years ago, hutanari started out as typical depictions of women with a vajayjay, but a penisu, where a clitoris would be. These hutanaris were often drawn at the height of sexual arousal, but since they lacked the full package, nothing really came out of it. Soon this changed, as hutas were drawn full packaged, with their vajayjays tucked underneath. Since hutas can now do it all, they seamlessly fit into all different illustrations of fantasies, as tops, as bottoms, paired with males, females, femboys, other hutas, anyone and everyone really. In the last decade, the huta landscape shifted once again as huta artists started to do away with drawing a vagina on hutas altogether, as having two holes on them felt excessive and unrealistic even for hentai. Thus, the contemporary huta has become the standard, having similar bodies and parts as trans women adult performers. It almost feels as if the hentai community took 30 years working through their desires backwards to arrive at the same point that trans porn has been at all this time. Much to the popularity of trans eroticism, contemporary futa has a huge dedicated fan base. Futa artists are well known to put in immense amount of hours into honing their art in ways comparable to the amount of commitment sculptors from ancient times placed in carving out statues of deities such as Hermaphroditus. They both feel like acts of worship in their own ways. The biggest appeal of Hutas and deities like Hermaphroditus is not only in their sexual aesthetics, but also that they hint at a world where desirable masculine and feminine traits can exist in one person, transformed in a way to express it anew, full of pleasure and joy, innocent, untamed by conventional shackles of gender and sex. Which brings us to you. Which would you say you exude more of? Having sexual agency or sexual desirability? Virility or beauty? Assertiveness or agreeableness? While on the surface, these may seem like gender-sex related attributes, in reality, they're present in all of us mere mortals. They are, however, pressured to be overexpressed or underexpressed based on one's gender or sex from childhood and often to the point of exhaustion. And trans people aren't necessarily exempt from all of this either. In fact, there are some of us who aim altogether to depart from having associations to masculine or feminine perceived traits, whether in behavioral context or symbolically implied through our body parts. Conversely, there are also those of us who strive for a unique fusion of both blends. Like a sophisticated perfume, we are all different. Embodying the best of both worlds is not something many are ready to attain, and even fewer who can or do attain it. One thing is for sure. Throughout time, different cultures have viewed those who have manifested mixed gender traits as enlightened. Although this has often been personified through trans-adjacent bodied beings, one doesn't necessarily need to look to trans to find such harmonious balances living amongst us, whether in the form of androgynous pop stars, female bodybuilders, or drag superstars. People who transfigure a harmony of gender and sexuality continue to inspire and challenge conceptual restrictions about gender and sex, as they have always done, existing in our collective unconscious for millennia. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more, like and subscribe. I am Lilith Nur, and these have been some of my musings.